The world is a beautiful but challenging place to live. And let's face it, life hits hard sometimes. So if you find your hopes and dreams and mental well-being needs a boost, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to Inspire Us with your host, J. Paul Nadeau, a former hostage negotiator turned motivational speaker and acclaimed author of Take Control of Your Life. And now, here's your host, J. Paul Nadeau.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Inspire Us. I want to take a few moments to pitch my book to you. Yes, I've done this before, and I don't mind doing it again. The book is called Take Control of Your Life, and it is changing people's lives. Actually, it's been credited on several occasions for actually saving lives. So if you haven't picked up your copy, I encourage you to do it. Yes, it's my book, but the content is helping to change people's lives and to help people back on course. So it is available at most bookstores out there and certainly online. Today we're going to be talking about, terrorism. But not only about terrorism, about disarming certain terrorists and how that can be done. We tend to label people very, very quickly. They're a terrorist, they're a criminal, they're a prostitute, they're a drug addict, they're homeless. These labels are not constructive, and they can hurt. And we don't know the person behind the label now, do we? My next guest is Jo Berry, who in 1984 lost her father to a terrorist bombing. That road to forgiveness was one that she chose to create for herself 2 days after the event. And it's been a journey, to say the very least. You know, we can disarm people with love, compassion, just by speaking to them and not being so damn judgmental all the time. What is the story behind the individual? I'm not suggesting that we're all going to accept the terrible acts that are committed against us. Of course not. But maybe, just maybe, it's worth looking into. Keeping an open mind. I'll let Jo tell you more about that, so without any further delay, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Jo Berry. Hello, Jo, and welcome to Inspire Us.
Oh, thank you. Wonderful to be here today.
Well, I'm really glad that you did pop by. And as it was, we were having a chat, ladies and gentlemen, before Jo arrived, and I was having a little bit of technical difficulty, but thank you very much for being patient. So I am excited to hear your story. What I thought we would do is I would have you tell your incredible story, and I'll ask you a few questions about it, because I think it's a story that needs to be told. And the overall theme is something that we need desperately. So, Jo, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you to tell us your story.
Well, thank you. So my story started a long time ago, back in 1984. I was living in England. And at that time, we had a lot of bombs go off because of the IRA in Northern Ireland. But I lived in peacetime. It was not something I ever worried about. And then October the 12th, 1984, my father, who was a politician, was killed in a bomb. It was a bomb that was intended for the whole British government. And I made a decision just 2 days later. I thought, if I have an enemy, if I blame, if I stay a victim or become bitter, then that's going to affect me all my life. So I chose to go on a journey to understand those who killed my father, to not blame, to understand the reasons why, and bring something positive out of what had happened. And that way I was going to win and I was going to feel better. So a journey started, and it's been a very long journey, and lots of extraordinary things have happened that have shown me the way to go. But a big part of it was we had a peace process, and that was incredible because people stopped being killed and stopped killing. And the only person who was ever in prison for planting that bomb, he became free. He walked out of prison. And that's when I decided I needed to meet him. Now, it wasn't to meet him. Sorry?
No, I was just saying, wow.
Yeah. Well, it was part of the peace process. It seemed like if I could meet him and see him as a human being, that would bring back some of my humanity. Now, he was the most demonized, the most hated terrorist we had at that time, because he nearly killed the prime minister. And I was never going to find out who he was by reading the media, because he was absolutely, demonized and called a monster and worse. So I privately went to meet him on my own, and no one knew this was happening, and, I now do restorative processes. This broke every single rule, because I'm there in a house in Dublin, in Ireland, just him and I having a private conversation. And I knew that he was committed to the peace process, so I knew I was safe. And he started off by giving me a lot of justification, self-righteousness. His community were the oppressed, they didn't have human rights, they tried non-violence, it didn't work. So basically justifying his actions in the IRA. And I knew he was going to do that. I'd done some preparation by meeting other men who'd been in the IRA. But I was also curious. I wanted to know more about him. And I remember at one point looking into his eyes as he's talking and saying that he was someone who cared for his community. And the moment I saw that he cared, he's no longer this faceless enemy. He's now a human being. And that was what I needed. I just needed him to reveal his humanity, which he did. But he was justifying killing my father, and that was difficult. So I'm going to go now. I've got what I want, and no one will ever know I've done this. Like, this is private for my healing. But that's when he changed, and he stopped talking. And he looked at me and he said, I don't know anymore who I am. Can I hear your pain? Can I hear your anger? What can I do for you? And I knew in that moment that a new journey had started. And I arrived at that meeting with my needs to see him as a human being, but now he's on his journey. And he changes, his voice changes, the way he looks at me changes, and his language changes. He starts saying I rather than we. And he would later say that he was disarmed by my empathy. And if I'd gone in there ranting and raging and blaming him and just telling him he was a bad person, he wouldn't have changed. But he chose to change because he felt safe. And for the first time, he's now seeing my dad as a human being and realizing that he was guilty of demonizing the other in the same way he accused the other of demonizing him. And that's what happens in conflict. So now he's become a human being and he's bringing my dad between us. He's asking questions about him. That means something to me. That means a lot.
You've unboxed a lot of things there, Joe. So after the killing in 1984, it was 2 days, you said, that you had come to this decision that you were going to try to, well, I want to touch on that. Not many people would do what you did, especially after 2 days. Tell me a little bit about your upbringing. Tell me a little bit about your father. He must have instilled in you certain characteristics, or did you come by them yourself? What led you to look at this horrible situation after such great loss? And I'm certain that you loved your father dearly. What was it inside of you? Like, tell me about your upbringing. What brought that out of you, Joe?
Yeah, I did love my dad, and I've been accused of not loving him because of what I went on to do, but it came out of love for him. And so the 2 years before my father was killed, I was actually living in the Himalayas in a hut. And during that time, I was studying Gandhi, studying nonviolence and believing in peace. But for me, it was about meditation. And meditation almost took me beyond emotions. I did not deal with pain or grief. I just used to meditate, and then I felt wonderful. But the bomb allowed me to, it was like the real world. This is the real world where people got killed and people killed, and meditation was never going to sort that out. So in a way, it didn't make sense of everything I had believed in, but it gave me a will to, I have to find a way to bring meaning to this. You know, I believed in peace all my life. I was one of those teenagers who saw Vietnam War and saw the Northern Irish conflict and just wanted it all to stop. You know, I wrote about nuclear bombs as a teenager, and so I was a natural pacifist from a very young age, and that stayed with me. But that's very easy in peacetime. You know, how was I going to bring those values now a bomb had gone off? And I think I either had to give up on the person I had been or start again. And I decided to start again. I had to kind of refine who I was post-bomb, because I couldn't be the person I had been before. And that's why I had to dig really deep inside myself and go, okay, I had no control over what's just happened to me, but I can bring some peace out of this. And now I know the pain of losing someone in a terrorist attack. I don't want anyone else to ever go through this again, because my heart knows the reality of war, of genocide, of terrorism, because there's a certain violence that happens, a certain kind of pain, which is, I believe, different from anything else. And I wanted to heal that for other people as well as for myself.
How many people in 1984 died in that explosion?
There were 5 people and many injured.
And this man obviously was caught some time later. And as you said, he spent some time in jail, rightfully so, for having been the mastermind behind this attack that took the life of 5 people. How much time did he spend in jail?
So he went, I think it was in 85, and came out in 99. Now, if we hadn't had the peace process, you know, he might be coming out now.
Correct. Yes, the peace process expedited his release because of the very fact that it was a peace process. So during those years, what are you doing? What's going on in your mind to contact him? What are you doing to gain access to this man and to speak to him about the things that you were feeling?
I didn't try to see him when he was in prison, because it would have been too difficult. And actually, he never would have seen me in prison, because all the time he's in prison, he's working as part of the IRA. It's still the same conflict for him. So it wouldn't have been safe. But I actually traveled to Belfast in 1985 and 1986. And I gave my first talk in 1985 to 1,000 people. So I was at that time talking about forgiveness. These days, I don't actually use the word unless I got time to explain it. But back in 84, I would go, yeah, I've forgiven him, but I was yet to do some of the emotional work. But I went to meet people who were part of some of the peace building groups, even back in 1985, 1986. I went to safe houses where Protestants and Catholics would meet. I met someone who was high up in Sinn Féin, who was part of the political wing of the IRA. I had someone from Longcash prison write to me. So I was immersing myself in the conflict even back then. But at that time, you know, it wasn't that safe for me to be there, because I was English, my father had been in the government. And so, well, I know that I put myself at risk, but back then I'm not really sure that I was aware of that or even cared. I was just intent on finding ways to make a difference and for all the terrible killing to stop. And I loved the people I met in Northern Ireland. I mean, they took me into their homes. They gave me food. They introduced me to people. I had the most extraordinary time of people who really valued that I cared about them, and there I was wanting to know more and like them believing in peace, because most people in these conflicts want peace. You know, they want it all to stop. It's just about, you know, how we can be empowered to actually make a difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I understand that this was likely therapy for you in a way, dealing with your father's death, but also going behind the curtain to find out what the motivations of other people are, and to see them, whether or not they have a human side to them. And it sounds very much like you found much of the human side that you were looking for, you found in these people. And I'm anxious to find out about your meeting with the man who took your father's life. And it happened in 1999, or he came out in
2000.
2000. He came out in 99. You
Yeah.
had, and tell us about that journey. How did you find him? And I know that the first meeting perhaps wasn't that great, but tell us about that.
Oh no, the first meeting was amazing, because I was quite clear that I was going to meet him just once, and that would be that. So during the year 2000, I was immersing myself in the conflict. Because of the peace process, there were all these support programs for people being affected by violence. And so I would go to many different workshops and weekends, and I met other men who'd been in the IRA, and they all said to me, but Joe, he doesn't have a problem. You're the one who's got the problem. Like, you know, he probably won't want to meet you because like, we're okay. It was almost like, because we had righteousness on our side, so we haven't got a problem. So he probably won't even want to meet you. But I met people who knew him, and that was important because they shared their experience of him, and then they also said they would arrange it. And every time someone said they knew him, and it's a small world in Northern Ireland, you know, it happened a lot, you know, I would say, okay, can you make it happen? And 3 times I actually I got phone calls or met someone and they said, oh, actually, he doesn't want to meet you. And I felt disappointed, but then also I trusted it. So the whole journey has been about synchronicity, serendipity, trusting the timing. And so I thought, well, if it's not right, it's not going to happen. And the other people I could meet, I was meeting people who were involved who were families who lost loved ones in Bloody Sunday. And Bloody Sunday was an appalling event that led to a whole lot of violence. Also, I was meeting families and some of the hunger strikers. So I was meeting other people. In terms of the other, there were many people to meet, you know, so I was having extraordinary meetings with all sorts of people. And I thought, that's okay. There's lots of other people in the IRA, I'll meet them. And then I wrote a poem for him called Bridges Can Be Built. And I shared it at a peace conference. And someone said to me under that, Joe, if you want me to make that meeting happen, I'll do it. And I said, okay, just let me know. And he did manage to do it. And when I met Patrick, so I was in a friend's house, I was just in the kitchen, but there was no prepared environment. I mean, you know, Paul, enough about these things. You'd normally expect to have mediators there and facilitators and, you know, preparation, none of it. It's just a friend's house. You know? And when he came in the door, one of the first things I said to him was, oh, I'm so pleased you've changed your mind and you've agreed to meet me. And he said, oh, no, I've always said I'd meet you. I've been asked a few times and I've always said, of course. And that was almost like an icebreaker because now we're talking about something that's happened to us both, which wasn't the bomb, you know. And the reason why I believe people said it shouldn't happen was because of the time. It was so soon after the peace process. And it was such a huge story, you know, for both of us. He was high profile. My dad had been high profile. They were worried perhaps I wasn't ready. He wasn't ready. You know, it was too early for people, I believe. And looking back, I can kind of understand why. But we got there, you know, and here I went to a room at the back of the house. And I do remember looking into his eyes and thinking, oh, you don't look like my idea of a terrorist. You know, some strange thoughts. Another voice in my head going, leave now while you can. You're with the man who killed your father. Just go. But I stayed and I listened to him deeply because I knew I wanted more than what he was sharing with me. And that's what he said disarmed him, was my listening. You know, I think about it. I'm just a woman who in some ways very, very naive and don't have a lot of political answers, but I was just there with my heart, just listening to him. And that enabled him, I believe, to feel safe, which is important. And then he opened up. And that's when the real conversation started. and we're still having it 21 years later.
That is incredible, Joe. And from what you said a little bit earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you first met Patrick in that home, he was justifying his actions. But it wasn't until he saw that you were actually very interested in seeing him, in hearing him, and understanding him with that empathy that you brought to the table, that changed his heart, and he saw you for who you were. That empathy disarmed him. There's a big message in what was just said here, because it's so true that terrorists, criminals, whatever people do, it doesn't mean that they have to remain that way, or that their hearts have to remain angry. And it's people like you that can disarm people with your approach and your empathy. Let's speak about that for a minute. What would you like to tell our listeners out there? Because I understand you, and I'll tell you, from my personal background, a terrorist actually saved my life because of the way that, because of the way that I had treated him with dignity and respect on an earlier occasion. Criminals have turned completely around, hardened criminals, murderers, because of the empathy that I showed them. And I've got stories just as you do. But Joe, I want to hear what you have to say about this, because I understand it. And I know that we can make a difference in this world. So what is your message to our listeners out there?
Oh, but it means so much to me. I know you do understand. And not everyone does. And you use the word dignity. And Patrick also used the word dignity. He said he never met anyone with so much dignity before. And that's what changed him. I believe that we all have the potential to not blame each other. When we're hurting, the first thing we think about is, who can I blame? Who can I make responsible for this? But that's not how we feel better. That's not. All that does, it keeps us suffering. So if we can say to ourselves, what's happened has been out of my control, and this is really difficult, but I'm not going to blame. I'm going to find a way to bring something positive out of this. And that means every emotion I feel, it's my emotional job to find a way to express it without hurting anyone. Then we break that cycle of violence and revenge. So it's giving up blame. And then it's about becoming curious. You know what? Everyone has a story. It doesn't mean that we have to tolerate behavior that hurts us, but we can become curious to understand it. And that gives us more choices on how to respond. We can challenge people without blaming them. We can still keep their dignity. So next time you want to blame, take a few breaths, find a way to say to yourself, this time, I'm not going to make someone wrong, because that will take some of my humanity away. I'm going to do what I need to do to feel better. And I will find a way, because life brings us those experiences. I really know with all of me that as soon as we say, I am going to stay, I'm going to find a way to do something different, then life conspires to bring us the opportunities to make a difference. It could be a book suddenly flashes up, or we meet a random stranger and we'll know our next steps. But just as we can all hurt each other, and I really believe we have the power to hurt, we all can hurt in extraordinary situations, but we also can heal and be resilient and be a positive change maker. And that means giving up an idea of the other, because actually we're all connected with the same humanity. So if we hurt someone, I believe the whole world hurts. So we can refine that empathy, that compassion, and our own humanity, and start thriving, and together make a difference in the world. You know, I do believe it is possible. We all have that potential, and we need support. We need each other. And that's one of the things that I do, is give a lot of people that support and that knowing and that belief in them, to empower them that we all can do it differently.
Joe, I love that, because your words are those of mine I've used on many occasions, because seek first to understand, then to be understood. Could you imagine if world leaders, instead of going to war, would sit down and listen to each other? We don't have to agree with another person's behavior, their actions, but we certainly can listen, can't we? And I think we could change the world with that attitude. And I really love what you said. Yeah, there's so much that you said and unpacked there. So I know what you just said to everybody, but if there were, have you thought of one line, or do you have something that you leave your audiences with? Because I'm gathering from you that you speak quite a bit on this topic. So what is it that you tell your audiences to do? Is there an action that they can take? Do you leave them with something that they can take into the world?
The one thing that I would recommend is remember that phrase. What's just happened was not in my control, but I'm going to choose how I respond. And it seems like we can have a sword and we can aim the sword at someone else, even maybe wanting to hurt them, or it could be a metaphor. Or we can take that sword and put it in the ground and go, I am going to find a way to bring something positive. And when we earth that sword, something changes in us. So just remember, put your sword in the ground and say, I'm going to find a way to bring something positive. And you will find your next step very quickly. But that is the first step.
Right. And the important thing is to take the first step, because as Lao Tzu says, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. The idea is that we keep on taking those steps. And in this case, this has been a wonderful conversation, and your journey, what an extraordinary journey. How can people reach out to you, Jo, and converse with you more, or ask you to speak? Do you have a website? Do you direct people somewhere?
Yeah, people are very welcome to contact me. I'm now working virtually like we all are. So I have a charity, which is Building Bridges for Peace. And I also have my own personal website, which is jo-berry.com. But if you Google Jo Berry, Building Bridges for Peace, you'll find me. And I love to be contacted. I love to lend my story so that we can start a different conversation with emotional safety and really validating everyone.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on today and for sharing your story, your incredible story and your journey with us. And you left us with a great message. We can find peace, and we can certainly connect with others. And the idea is to empathize and to listen and to truly be present, because as you said, everybody has a story, and we tend to judge the action as opposed to the individual far too quickly. So thank you, Jo, for reminding us of that. And ladies and gentlemen, I will put the website in the show notes. And Jo, thank you so much. I wish you every success on your journey. And I hope that you help to change this world, because we really need it.
Wow. Oh, thank you so much. It's been a joy and a blessing to speak with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo.
Thanks for listening. Tune in next week for another insightful episode. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and leave your comments. For more information, check out our website at www.inspireus.ca. Remember, it's not what happens to us that matters most. It's how we respond to what happens to us that does. Stay strong and resilient.